These guys, 3 guys, they're blackmailing me. I wouldn't pay them. They had pictures of me and Cindy in a hotel. Yesterday, they showed me a videotape of Cindy strapped in a chair, being shot in the chest 5 times. And this accountant, he was my gun to kill her.
Roy Scheider's been fooling around with a topless dancer, and now he tells his wife, Anne Margaret, that he's being blackmailed. That's the setup for 52 Pickup, one of the new movies we're going to be reviewing this week. And I'm Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times.
I'm Gene Siskel of the Chicago Tribune. The title 52 Pickup refers, of course, to that old joke about a card game where you throw the cards in the air and someone else has to pick all 52 of them up. In the movie, Roy Scheider plays a successful businessman whose life is a house of cards that has been thrown in the air by blackmailers who have videotape proof that he's been cheating on his wife. When Scheider refuses to pay them, they murder his lover, frame him, and then up the ante. Rather than pay the ransom, Scheider decides to go after the trio of thugs one by one. And his journey takes him into the drug and porno worlds, where he interviews a prostitute who is friendly with a young girl he'd been seeing.
Leo has a couple of pals. A white one and a black one.
Honey, I didn't say nothing. That's the envelope you've got there, huh?
The white guy. Smooth talker, businessman. You trust him, Doreen? What's his name?
For some reason, I'm not getting through to you.
Anne Margaret plays Scheider's wife, and after she gets mad at him, she agrees to help him. And here they combat the most brutal of the extortionists.
How come you come busting in here when I'm going to hand you $50,000 in cash?
50,000?
52. That's the deal I made with Alan. Didn't he tell you?
That was Clarence Williams III. Remember him from TV's Mod Squad a long time ago? Haven't seen him in a very long time, and he's a pretty good villain in this piece. In fact, a number of the performances are very good, especially Roy Scheider, and John Glover is the leader of the extortion gang. He is creepy and smart. The movie broke down, though, for me in 2 ways. One, I thought its story was highly contrived, too many loopholes in behavior. And second, I thought the violent sex in the film was much more than I cared to stomach. And that comes from the same guy who last week said he liked the violent, sexually violent, Something Wild, and I also liked the sexually violent Blue Velvet. But this picture, I thought, really lingered over its violence, and that turned me off, even though I did enjoy the performances and the general outline of the story. It's a close call, but I wouldn't recommend 52 Pickup to a friend.
Well, I would recommend it to a friend, and I thought it was one of the best movies in a long time by John Frankenheimer, the director, who has been through a bad period, and this is really his comeback with a vengeance. And I love John Glover's performance as the villain. I think one of the things that so many modern thrillers forget, because they get a big star as the hero, and then the whole movie is about the star, and the villains are just these people that come on and go through their rote and then leave and so forth. This villain is a great villain. In fact, there were three villains in the movie altogether. Glover is the best one. And he's so evil and so convincing in his evil and so slick and so intelligent, as you said, that makes the movie work for me.
Roger, do you think the movie would be helped if they simply cut out some of the sex and the explicit sex? I think it would be helped tremendously. I would recommend it, for example.
I think what they're trying to do is be true to the author of the novel, Elmore Leonard, who a lot of people think is the best mystery writer in America today. And of course, in his books, the plots are complicated, just like this plot that you thought was too complicated.
Not complicated.
The violence is always very bizarre and very strung out, and I think they're trying to get that same feeling.
One thing.
This guy is a really slimy killer, and you've got to identify how slimy he is to make Scheider's reaction more convincing.
What's on the page can be one thing. When it's put on the screen, it can go overboard. And that's all I'm saying is I think that they went overboard and ruined what in many other ways, is a good film.
Well, there's one thing I know when I see a thriller, it's that I'm not going to be thrilled with a modern thriller 9 times out of 10 because they haven't had any imagination. So this time it worked for me, so maybe I'm giving a pass to some of this other stuff. I don't know. Okay. I would recommend it. Our next movie is named Nobody's Fool, and it stars Rosanna Arquette as a small-town waitress who's trying to recover from the shock of being abandoned by her boyfriend. She acts sort of goofy all the time in this film, maybe as a cover-up for the much deeper emotions that she feels because she was pregnant when the boyfriend bailed out and she had to give the baby up for adoption. Now she gets some advice from her best friend, played by Mara Winningham, who thinks it's time for her to make a fresh start in life. There's a summer theater in the town, and Eric Roberts works in the backstage crew. Arquette meets him in the park, and she starts to like him. But she's still hung up on her old boyfriend, and in a flashback, she remembers her rejection.
I thought we were going to get married.
Still look, don't.
You told me you love little babies. You told me you love my meat pot pies. Now you're telling me you want to split 50-50 and you don't feel ready to cash in your chips?
Story, settle down.
Well, it's too late. Your chips are cashed. I'm sorry, they're cashed.
Story, people are staring at us. Pop your top. Come on.
Roberts tries to set her at ease by confessing his own shortcomings.
You know, when I was 3 years old, I strangled a white kitten to death with my bare hands. At 9 years old, I cracked open my favorite girlfriend's skull with a steel pipe. Wham! She was out like a light. At 13, I listened to my mother's employer, Mrs. Bessel, choke to death while I was live-in nurse on the bathroom floor. At 19, I was a certifiable dope dealer and my best customer. Whoa! It's okay, I got it. It's okay, it's okay, it's okay. Okay, here we go.
And so the whole movie comes down to, is this true love? And if it is, will she drop everything and move to Los Angeles with him?
Look, I'm leaving town right after the show tonight. If you decide that you want to go with me for some unknowable reason, just be at my place and we'll split.
Rosanna Arquette creates a nice, winsome, lovable goofball in this movie. In fact, I like her in almost everything she's done in the movie. She has a real appealing quality about her. And Eric Roberts is good, too. He's a little more toned down here from his usually very intense performing style, which is sometimes really too intense for some of his material. I like their relationship, but what I didn't like about Nobody's Fool was the way the movie used flashbacks in order to gradually reveal the story of Arquette's earlier boyfriend and that pregnancy that was so traumatic for her. If the story had been told from beginning to end, I would have had a lot more sympathy for her, but with all those flashbacks, the movie waited too long to tell me why I should really care about this woman, and as usual, what flashbacks in a movie often call attention to is really just the style of the writing and the directing. A movie like this depends so much on sympathy for the characters that the filmmakers and their style should try to remain in the background. Nobody's Fool has some good stuff in it, but it's a disappointment, and even though I like Rosanna Arquette, I have to vote thumbs down.
I vote thumbs down completely. There wasn't much I liked about it at all, and if you'll take out those flashbacks that you object to, and I think properly so, I think they would have had time to build more interest in the characters. I thought the characters actually were kind of flimsy. She's just generic girl, small-town girl, held back. He's just... Well, he has a more interesting past than the kind of character we've met. I mean, he's had a troubled past. He's extremely violent, and he does break out into, again, Eric Roberts gets caught up in being violent too much. And if you had taken the time out, we don't really care about this other pregnancy and this other character that comes in. Just tell the story straight, as you said.
Well, you would probably care about it if it began at the beginning of the movie, because then you could see where she came from. But here, we see her acting in a very peculiar manner for a long time before we know exactly why.
That's it.
Then, of course, that kind of sabotages the end of the movie, because once we now care for her and want her not to be hurt again, we're asking ourselves,
is this the right guy?
Maybe she shouldn't go off with this guy. He seems to be a little bit weird himself.
Yes, he is weird, and I'll tell you, I thought the movie was very flat, traditional backstage romance, and the guy takes the girl and rescues her. And frankly, she should have been given much more interest in her character so that some guy doesn't have to save her, because that's sort of chauvinistic, isn't it?
Especially if it's Eric Roberts who's going to save him.
Yeah, and especially Rosanna Arquette, who can save herself. She's been stronger in other movies. Coming up next, a review of Tai-Pan, the epic story of the founding of Hong Kong as a trading port.
They were all forbidden in China, but now they can land here, trade here. Oh, it's a glorious night, Mary Sinclair.
The next film is Tai-Pan, based on James Clavell's best-selling novel from the 1960s about the Europeans who founded Hong Kong as a trading port, using opium in exchange for tea and thus corrupting the native Chinese population. Now, that story might have made a terrific political movie, but the movie Tai-Pan, the title refers to a trading baron, is really nothing more than a landlocked pirate movie full of fights and threats and drunken parties and womanizing and generational battles. amid crashing rainstorms, and all this fury is a crushing bore. Australian actor Brian Brown plays the Tai-Pan who loves a native woman, and she gets angry when he flirts with another woman. The scene is sort of a bad Asian version of Gone with the Wind.
Yeah, men's.
Men, not men's.
Men! I am told men's a place in best on the winner of your prize. And you stand there and eat up her bosoms.
Eventually, the film reduces itself to a big fight between two men who want to control Hong Kong, played by Brian Brown and John Stanton. The impending rainstorm is supposed to add drama, I guess, to the fight. There's a lot more rain than that. At that point, I'd like to see him bring out mops and just hit each other or clean up the mess, one of the two. By the time that fight comes around, we have been laughing at the overblown action in Tai-Pan. Roger, you'll get your say in just a second. I'm sure you can think of things I forgot. The waste of the Chinese locations and all the fal-de-ral about who's going to marry whom. Hong Kong is supposedly one of the most exciting places in the world. Well, the Hong Kong Travel Association ought to ban the showing of this movie, which does nothing to arouse our interest in Hong Kong's past or present. It's a major waste of time and money. Our time, their money.
This is one of the most ridiculous movies that I have seen probably in 5 years. I'm trying to think back, probably since Inframan, the one about how
I want to point out that you were out of town on Howard the Duck.
I did miss Howard the Duck. This movie is unbelievable. One of my favorite scenes involves Mary Sinclair, that girl who comes out from London and becomes such a successful prostitute that when the one Tai-Pan's notes are called in, she is, but just from her savings account, she's able to advance him enough money to buy all of Hong Kong, which inspires that fabulous line, "You're not the Mary Sinclair I knew."
Yeah.
Apparently what happened is the entire British Empire went out there and spent 40 years in bed, right? And occasionally they got up for a costume dance or a sword fight. Right. And the other amazing thing is none of these guys age. You notice that?
I didn't notice
you see
that. Brian
Brown at the beginning, they're shelling the Chinese coast. It's about 1802 or 1804.
Right.
40 years later, he's still dancing around in the parapets in this big sword fight. Meanwhile, he's got a grown son. I mean, he must be about 80 by then, and he hasn't, not a single whisker has changed. It's unbelievable.
Roger will be back with more comments about this movie on other shows. It'll take other shows to complete your review. When we come back, we'll review one of the most extraordinary films of the year, The Sacrifice, about a man who offers his own life to stop a nuclear war.
Our next movie is named The Sacrifice, and this is a strange, intense, and haunting movie. I saw people who actually broke down in tears after seeing it, and I knew how they felt. The movie is an international production directed by Andrei Tarkovsky, a Russian now living in Paris, and it was shot on the island of Faro in the Baltic Sea between Sweden and Russia. That's the same island where Ingmar Bergman shoots most of his films, and the bleak landscape will look familiar if you've seen some Bergman films. The movie stars Erland Josephson as a man who lives a quiet, closed-off existence on the island, and one day he experiences what he has long dreaded, bombers streaking overhead on their way to begin World War III. The movie now almost enters into this man's own soul, where he performs an examination of conscience to see whether his own sins and failings are being punished. Then he offers a sacrifice, his own life, to buy back a few seconds of the precious time of the universe, which would mean that the missiles had never been sent. I think Tarkovsky is trying to do a very interesting thing here. He's not suggesting that that man can change the world with his sacrifice, but what he is suggesting is that this man's whole world exists within his own mind, and that the nuclear destruction is the result of mankind not being as good, as noble, as honest, and as fair as it should be. So in a way, the man is asking for a second chance for himself and for all of us. The movie is not simply about nuclear war. It's about the war between good and evil in one man's soul. It's almost as if the movie says nuclear war comes out of the evil in our soul. If we can cure our souls, we can clear our destruction. The Sacrifice is difficult and powerful and very, very effective, and I must say, it's also very long. It might be an ordeal for some people to sit through. I got into it.
I got into it, and I got out of it, and I got into it. It's 2.5 hours long, and I think the film is quite uneven. There are some very beautiful things in there. There's a beautiful monologue by Erland Josephson. When it it almost plays like a great Bergman film. But then they bring in other side characters, members of his family, neighbors, maids, and all that, and I thought all those characters were pointless, really had nothing to say, nothing as eloquent, and I felt that the film broke down every time we got away from this one man. There's some beautiful images. There's a gorgeous shot of snow and leaves being blown across by the wind, and it's almost like a shot of the earth, just a firestorm going right across and wiping out the face of the earth. The film is great beauty and great monologues, but then it has a whole bunch of other stuff in it which makes the film very uneven.
Well, maybe you ought to say something about Tarkovsky, who directed it. I've seen at least 3 of his other films, Nostalgia, Solaris, and Andrei Rublev, that film about the building of the giant bell in the Middle Ages, one of the greatest films ever made. Tarkovsky's films are always long. And one of the things I think he's trying to do is make his films so long that we lose touch with the person that we were when we came into the theater, in a way, that we come entirely into his universe, and he completely absorbs us with these images, including the downtime, including the boring time, so if it is boring, so that by the end he's got us reduced to the point where he can give us the message that he's trying to give us. In other words, it's the opposite of entertaining us. He's trying to absorb us.
Yeah, well, Roger, I got the message because in his opening speech it's very clear what he's talking about, and he has, and the nightmare of the destruction of the earth. I got the message very early. I'm just saying that let's take an editing to this film, and we would have a great film. We would have a great film if we reduced the characters.
Well, I certainly can recommend it anyway, especially to anyone who finds that kind of subject matter interesting, because it's not just a propaganda film. It's very thoughtful. Coming up next, our special home video segment, and we're going to review 2 new releases, including an American thriller and a surprising smash hit from Africa.
Where we take a look at new releases just out in your local cassette store. And the film this week that caught my eye is one of the most successful foreign films ever to play America. It's The Gods Must Be Crazy, a fanciful yarn from South Africa about a primitive tribe finding a Coke bottle and beginning to worship it, and how that worship changes all their lives. It brings the natives in contact with white society, for one thing, and that's where the film breaks down for me into ordinary slapstick, as in this scene. That's funny? Not to me. I found the film split into 2 parts for me. The original story involving the guy who finds the Coke bottle and his tribe was very funny and very well done. But the white people, I think, were just fools, and their humor, routine slapstick comedy. I wish the movie had stayed with the Coke bottle and with the tribe.
I enjoyed this movie, and I thought it was fun, but what I've never been able to understand is why it's become such an amazing phenomenon. I mean, this movie's been playing for 5 years in Paris. It's been playing all over the United States, week after week, and month after month, and gosh, I don't know. I mean, it was a pleasant enough movie, but what's the big deal? The big deal is people want wholesome entertainment, and it's being proved again with Crocodile Dundee. Wholesome entertainment, and an older audience will go and see it, and that's why they enjoy it. So now we can have The Crocodiles Must Be Crazy. That could be a real big hit. Yep. My choice in the video store this week is a sleeper from earlier this year, a movie named Hard Choices that didn't get nearly as much attention as I thought it deserved. The movie stars Gary McCleary as a teenage kid who gets caught when his brothers commit a crime and kill a policeman, and in jail, he's visited by a youth worker played by Margaret Klink. The movie takes a startling twist when the woman decides to help him escape.
Okay. Does he have a gun, Bobby?
It's on the wall.
Go get it.
Just wait a minute.
Go get the gun.
A lot of movies start out unpredictably and then gradually sink back into stuff that you know is going to happen. Hard Choices starts out like a well-intentioned TV docudrama all about the plight of underage prisoners, but then it explodes into a series of absolutely unexpected scenes in which that youth worker turns out to be a lot more complicated than she seems. As played by Margaret Klink, it's a totally original performance. I loved it. Hard Choices is the movie, and it should be around this week in the video store. I liked it too. It caught me totally by surprise, and how often can we say that about movies? Where you can guess the plots all the time, it seems. This one fooled me. I liked that in a movie called Something Wild that came out recently where I couldn't follow what was going to go on, and she gives a terrific performance. Let's say her name again. Margaret Klink. Margaret Klink, because so often people get nominated for Oscars because they were in hit movies and they're big stars, and a performance like this is ignored. Just totally ignored. Let's recap the reviews of the movies on this program. Gene and I split on the thriller 52 Pickup. I found it gripping and compelling. He thought the story was implausible and needlessly violent, even though the performances were fine, so 1 thumb up and 1 thumb down. We were in agreement that Nobody's Fool was a love story that alternated between being too cute and too violent, so 2 thumbs down. We hated even more the wasteful, absurd, epic Tai-Pan. Let's pan it. 2 more thumbs down for a film that gives Hong Kong a bad name. And finally, a split on The Sacrifice, the visually stunning story of one man's attempt to keep the world from self-destruction. I think it's a great film. Gene found it spotty. He thought it was better looking than it was acted. So I really am really strong for The Sacrifice and also 52 Pickup.
Okay, and I'm tough to please.
You
That's it for this week. Next week, we'll return with reviews of 4 new movies, including Streets of Gold, with Klaus Maria Brandauer as an exiled boxing champion trying to make his way in America, and Harrison Ford's new film, The Mosquito Coast. That's next week, and until then, the balcony is closed.
Schaefer & Sons classic pianos, organs, guitars, and drums. Instruments for all your musical needs. From Schaefer & Sons. Raisinets and Goobers are playing everywhere. Starring plump, juicy raisins and great golden peanuts. Both now feature creamy milk chocolate. Curel moisturizing lotion. Most women agree. Curel ends dry skin. Stetson, the gift that fits the man. Stetson cologne, a cologne that's easier to wear, hard to resist. Stetson fits.